Alnisa, Allgood. Thank you for joining me on 20-Minute Leaders. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. So Alnisa, you're one of the most fascinating people that I get to speak to because you're helping so many different nonprofits on so many different sectors, and you have such a unique background coming into this. But first, I have to ask: your last name is Allgood, and you're helping so many nonprofits, and you're running Collaboration for Good. Is that a coincidence?
I frequently get asked that, and in some ways, yes, and then in other ways, people say that potentially my name helped shape what I'm doing in the world.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, okay, so let's just dive into it. Tell me a little bit about the nonprofit world. And most people have no idea what nonprofits are. So 501(c)(3)s, or is it 501(c)(3)? I don't even know myself.
It's it's basically almost anything in the 501(c) category, but most people just think of the 501(c)(3)s. 501(c)(3)s are charitable organizations, but there are about 26 classifications of nonprofits.
Okay, so what is a nonprofit, and how does it differ from a for-profit company?
Well, the biggest distinction is basically a nonprofit is pretty much just a corporation, a non-stock corporation that makes a pledge that any profits that it generates goes back into the organization and to help provide for the services that the organization provides. So the primary distinction is really just based around profit, to be perfectly honest. It's like for-profits get to pay out their profits either in stock options or to family members or whatever.
Sure.
They don't have to retain those profits internally, and nonprofits basically reinvest profits back into the social good that they're doing.
Sure. So people still get a salary. You still have the same idea. You have a board seat. You have board seats. You have milestones, deadlines. You're running as a legitimate company, but the key difference is then how do you pay off? Do you pay off dividends, or do you just pull all that money back into the service that the company's providing? Right.
Yeah, for the most part. So typically speaking, you're running for the most part the same as a typical business, with some hindrances, I would say,
Sure.
in that process, and more so from what people think a nonprofit is versus what a nonprofit can be in terms of doing that. But generally speaking, it's pretty much just a business with a dual bottom line, or sometimes triple bottom lines, or even more so than that. Like, so the primary bottom line for a nonprofit is the social impact or the social services that they're trying to accomplish or make in that, whereas the primary bottom line for most businesses is cash.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So then comes Allgood into the picture, and you're really making an impact on a lot of nonprofits. So what do you do there?
So with Collaboration for Good, we basically do capacity building programs for nonprofit organizations and the social good sector as a whole. So that's one side of it. And then the other side of it is that we basically find and grow social entrepreneurs. So people who will start either nonprofits, for-profits, or cooperatives, but they're all wanting to take on at least a double bottom line. So they want to do a social impact for their communities that they're targeting, as well as make livable incomes for themselves and their employees.
Okay, and how does that actually come to play? So fine, there's an interesting social entrepreneur that was trying to get stuff off the ground. What does your relationship with them look like?
So our primary relationship looks like we run a social good accelerator. It's just called the Social Good Accelerator. And we work with like 25 social enterprises per year with that. And so they can be from 0 to about 3 to 5 years in terms of development for that. So some people are really just coming in with a strong idea that we think is viable and that we think would make a difference. And other people have been working at it for 3 or 5 years, but haven't gotten much traction
Right.
In that. And so then we help them focus, we help them prioritize what steps they want to do next so that they can start actually seeing it more as a sequence of steps, a messy sequence of steps, but still a way forward. And then we just provide support, community, access to resources like consultants, mentors, peer-to-peer help, and things like that. And we're hopefully moving to a place where eventually we'll also be able to give them some types of financial resources as well. So that might be a few years out.
So I went through some accelerators myself, and a lot of my friends who go through startup accelerators, 500 startups, the Junction, Techstars, et cetera, et cetera. How do these accelerators differ from the social accelerator, or the one that you're running? Because you're not focused on fundraising, right? And you're not necessarily focusing on a lot of the for-profit ideas, but so what do you focus on?
Well, the overlap between regular accelerators is fairly strong. I would say there's something like a 60 to 75% overlap for the main components of it. Basically, discovery of who you want and who fits your model for your accelerator.
Right.
The classwork and things like that we're doing. I think where we predominantly differ from that is that we also have the components of the impact that we want to make. So wage wealth equity is a big issue for us. So we don't want, especially since we're targeting predominantly women and people of color in our programs, is that we don't want them to end up in the same dire straits as they're running a nonprofit or a business that they started in. Yep. So we're teaching them about what's being consistent pay to well paid, right? And so we try to teach them about like kind of minimal levels of income that they want to generate, especially if they're women. We're talking about like stuff like you shouldn't be paying yourself less than $75,000 a year for that. I mean, and you can do less, but like your rate should at the very least be 75, and you're just paying yourself a percentage of it as opposed to,
So tell me, so why is that a recommendation? Why do you recommend? Because a lot of other accelerators are telling their founders, you know what, I don't want you to get, maybe you shouldn't take a salary really for the next 2 years. That shows a vote of confidence. So talk to me a little bit about the $75,000.
Yeah, so it's basically because we're focusing on the fact that it's something that all of our participants are going to have to try to achieve in the first place, but like a lot of people who are doing social good are used to people telling them that they shouldn't get paid for doing good, right? And
yeah, because then you feel bad about it. I'm getting paid for doing good.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and so a lot of people who work for nonprofits or who start nonprofits end up in situations where they're in sometimes worse financial shape than the people that they're providing services to. The number of people that I know and that we've worked with in nonprofits who have to go to local food banks or personal essential pantries to kind of get them through the rest of the month off the income that they're making is relatively high, right? And we're trying to stop that. But also $75,000, I think, is that point where most people can relax a little bit. You're not really wealthy at that point, but you're not worried that you might lose everything within 2 months, right?
Sure. Sure.
And for women, I think that's even more important because,
Yep.
especially if you're a heterosexual woman, one accidental pregnancy and you're raising a child, that can literally, just childcare alone can run between $15,000 to $20,000 a year. And then you
Wow.
still have a child and you have the health care.
Yeah.
That basically just drops a $75,000 salary below 50, sometimes closer back to 35, $1,000 there. And that's just something that we don't want to see.
What's another recommendation that you're pushing for? It's
Um,
fascinating.
yeah, so so not only like paying themselves well, but also paying the people they employ
Yeah.
well. And so it's about kind of changing the dynamic of what do we consider livable wage, and getting out of that argument of minimum wage, or I'm doing $1 above minimum wage, which is still just nothing, right?
Still minimum wage. Yeah.
Yeah, it's still pretty much minimum wage. And then in some places like that are slightly more progressive, like Madison, like they'll argue for minimum wage of $15 an hour. But the cost of living here is, just to make ends meet, you need an income of $35,000 or higher, probably closer to 40. And that's just to make ends meet. That's
Yep.
still putting you in the range that if one crisis happens, you could be out on the street within like 30 days.
I was in an economics class at Stanford the other day, and this really this troubling statistic where more than half of Americans, if they face an emergency situation where they have to provide $400 cash, they're not able to do so.
Right.
Which I think is something to really ponder on.
Yeah, and that's for a variety of reasons, but a lot of it is also just because, especially with people who work in the social goods sector, which isn't just entirely nonprofits, but for a lot of them, yeah, they have no cash savings whatsoever. They're definitely still in that mode where if you grew up in poverty, there was like the mode of, are we paying the telephone this month or like the heat this month, right? And a lot of people who work in the social goods sector, that's kind of where they're at continuously.
So during the day they go and they help others and they help run social good projects, but then at night they have to decide whether they're paying their phone bill or the heater. That's just that's unbelievable, and I don't think that that's something that people often think about from the aspect of the people that are actually running these projects. Tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you even get to this? It doesn't seem very ordinary that somebody just wakes up and says, "Yeah, I'm going to run an accelerator for social good companies, and I'm going to help social entrepreneurs make an impact on the world." So how do you even get there?
Well, mine was a bit of a windy path. My first job was with a nonprofit when I was 14 years old, and so I actually come from a history of poverty. I was raised in Warren, Ohio. It was a steel belt town, basically, and the steel industry died during like that period of time. And so it went from like a pretty middle class town to a town that had really great divides in it. And so, because most people either went into the military or they went into the steel mill for it. So we went from kind of being middle class to being poor, and then my father died, and then we went to being extremely poor. For that, we were a family of 6 at that point, and I would assume that my mom was barely making $20,000 a year for us. So at 14, I got my first job, and it was twofold: to help out around the house and an actual financial way, but also just because my mom used to just dress me really girly and I hated all of the clothes that she would buy me. And so I agreed to take on purchasing my own school clothes if she let me get a job.
Amazing.
So, and I started working with a few nonprofits then, but I think that's when I still really started consolidating my thoughts around community and our responsibility to society. So as a country, as a city, as just even a neighborhood, what is your responsibility to the people that are around you? I didn't want to go into the Army, but I wasn't opposed to military service. So in junior high, I participated in a program that led me to a junior Air Force ROTC program. And I basically made a decision that I could still do military service and get a college education, which was kind of looked down upon in our family, like the college education. It was kind of like, you need to go to work as quickly as possible and, and start making a living for yourself there.
Right.
I got the full ride scholarship from the Air Force to do chemical engineering.
Wow.
At Penn State, and chemical engineering was the Air Force's choice. I was actually more interested in mechanical engineering at the time, but it was the option that was going to get me the scholarship with a lot less competition. So I was like, fine, I can do chemical engineering.
Wow.
But then when I went to Penn State, I also made sure that I had a second degree option, which was called the Administration of Justice, which is kind of a combination between looking at society and its infrastructure and the criminology and crime and laws and crimes, basically, and for that. And so I was doing that for most of college, and then I came out as a lesbian. Which I should have probably thought of earlier when I basically took over purchasing my own clothes, but I did. That was before Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And so I did lose my scholarship for that. And
you lost the scholarship.
Yes. Said. Yeah, because at that point, the military didn't accept out.
And so at what point in your college career does that happen?
That was like the end of the sophomore, beginning of the junior year.
So all of a sudden you get a letter and you're saying, listen, never mind, please don't come to the military. By the way, we also want you to pay for the 2 years that you've done and the 2 more years that you have in front of you.
Yes and no. So that is what typically would have happened, but my officers, the officers I worked with, really liked me. And I was actually on the path to enter the Air Force as like a first lieutenant, with just being just being a little bit away from being a captain.
Wow.
So when they pre-informed me that I was going to lose the scholarship, and they submitted multiple letters of recommendation that I not have to repay.
Okay.
Stuff before. So then it just became a matter of I had to pay for the future years
right.
of college, which was highly expensive because I was still considered out of state. And I was also supporting my mother and my younger brother. And so that actually what it did is, because of the notice change, I became essentially homeless and penniless for a while, even though I was working full time. Almost all the money that I was working full time for was going back to my mom and my brother and one of my nieces that was living with my mom. But I don't want to say it wasn't like your typical homelessness. Like it was kind of a privileged homelessness, if you could say that. I was on a college campus. I knew I wasn't going to stay homeless. It was more just about how long would it take me to accumulate the money that I could then live somewhere.
Well, what does that practically mean, homeless on a college campus?
Well, it means that there's hidden places that you can sleep in on college campuses.
Wow.
I mean, because just think about when you're on a college campus and you're doing an all-nighter at the library, right? people fall asleep there, but you don't actually get to lay down and go to sleep. You have to like pretend that you're studying, and you put a book out and you lay your head.
So just to get this right, you would go to classes all day, you would work to support your family back at home, and then you would go and find hidden spots at the university so that you can get some rest in order to wake up for classes and work the next day.
Yes.
And how long did that last for?
That lasted for about 6.5 months. Definitely
6 months.
Yeah, a lot longer time than it should have if I wasn't taking care of like my family, because it basically became I could take this money, accumulate like a month of rent and then the current month of rent for a deposit.
Sure.
Or I can basically keep sending the money to my family, and then I'm saving a much smaller amount, like month, basically.
Right. No. Of course. No, that's unbelievable. You know, I'm so inspired by the work that you're doing, and you know the adversity that you went through, and I'm sure that it shines with every social entrepreneur that you get to work with, and I hope that we get to work together on some projects later on as well. And I have to come see this accelerator myself because it just sounds so very cool. I do have to ask before we leave, and I can't believe 20 minutes are almost over. I have so many more questions. I have to ask you the last question, which is 3 words that you would best describe yourself.
I would say I'm fairly resilient, I think, across the board.
I would say so.
Kind of quiet or potentially composed, generally speaking. I try not to let too much anger me unreasonably. I do try to keep a certain amount of anger there if it actually can help propel things forward.
Nice.
And then I would say I'm curious, but I would say more people would probably call that querying than curious, because my friends hate it. I'm always asking questions about stuff, and like sometimes they're like, I know what I'm talking about, and I'm like, well, it's not that I don't trust that you know what you're talking about. I'm asking questions so I can figure out how this relates to other things. Right?
I love it. Alnisa, thank you so much. Keep on helping people change the world. Keep on changing the world yourself. This is such a unique privilege for me to have done this. And I look forward to remaining in touch.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for the ask and the invite.
Of course. Thank you.
All right.
Take care.
Bye.